Winter had swallowed the Wyoming frontier whole. A fierce storm rolled across the endless plains, carrying heavy snow mixed with freezing rain. The wind screamed through the pine trees, bent old fences, and covered every trail beneath a blanket of white. Night was falling fast, turning the lonely wilderness into a place where even experienced cowboys stayed indoors. Only the desperate ventured out in weather like this. Far from town stood a weathered ranch surrounded by wide pastures and sturdy horse barns. Warm light glowed from the windows of the log cabin, the only sign of life for miles. Inside lived Ethan Walker. At 32, Ethan was the kind of man people noticed the moment he rode into town. He stood well over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, and powerfully built from years of honest work. Thick dark curls framed a rugged, handsome face marked by a strong jaw and calm confidence. His striking blue-green eyes were unforgettable, carrying both quiet kindness and the loneliness of a man who had spent too many years without family. Children admired him. Women whispered about him. Men respected him. Yet few truly knew him. After losing both his parents while still young, Ethan had inherited the ranch and devoted himself entirely to it. His horses became his companions. His loyal sheepdog greeted him every morning. The cattle, the fields, and the endless work filled his days. When the chores were finished, silence was always waiting for him. He never complained. Loneliness had simply become another part of ranch life. That evening he added another log to the fireplace while a pot of beef stew simmered above the flames. Outside, the storm grew louder, shaking the cabin walls. "It'll be a long night," he murmured to himself. Then came a sound that shouldn't have been there. Knock. It was so faint he almost believed he'd imagined it. Another knock followed. Knock, knock. Not the confident knock of a traveler. A tiny one, weak, desperate. Ethan immediately opened the door. A blast of icy wind swept into the cabin. Standing on the porch were 2 little girls no older than 7. They were identical twins. Their blonde braids were soaked with icy rain. Their little coats were covered in snow, their boots nearly buried beneath white drifts. They trembled so violently they could barely remain standing. Without hesitation, Ethan knelt before them. My goodness! The girls looked at him with frightened blue eyes. One clutched her sister's hand so tightly her tiny fingers had turned white. The other leaned close and whispered with a trembling voice. They want to hurt Mom. Her lip quivered. She's very sick. Ethan's expression changed instantly. He guided both girls inside, shut the heavy door against the storm, and wrapped thick wool blankets around their tiny shoulders. Sit by the fire, he said gently. You're safe here. The warmth slowly brought color back to their frozen faces. Ethan poured warm milk into 2 mugs while they tried to stop shaking. My name's Ethan, he said softly. What's yours? I'm Emma. And I'm Emily. They thanked him politely before taking careful sips. Children raised with kindness, Ethan thought. Not spoiled, not rude, just scared. After several quiet moments, Emma finally spoke again. Our mom told us not to leave the house. Emily continued through tears. But we didn't know who else to ask. Ethan sat across from them. Tell me everything. The twins glanced at one another before Emma gathered enough courage. Our mommy's name is Sarah. Emily nodded. Papa died 3 years ago. Since then, Sarah had worked every sunrise and every sunset on their tiny ranch a few miles away. She repaired fences herself, fed the animals, chopped wood, and sold eggs, milk, and vegetables in town. She smiled every day so her daughters would never worry. But the smile hid a painful secret. For months, Sarah had been growing weaker. The coughing came first, then constant fever. Soon even simple chores left her exhausted. Still, every morning she forced herself out of bed because her girls depended on her. She never admitted how sick she truly was. Whenever the twins asked if she felt all right, she always smiled. I'm just tired, sweetheart. But children noticed more than adults realized. Emma had seen her mother quietly coughing blood into a handkerchief. Emily had watched her nearly collapse while carrying a bucket from the well. Sarah always pretended nothing had happened. She wanted her daughters to believe everything would be okay. Then came something even worse. 2 nights earlier, the twins had accidentally overheard Sarah's wealthy relatives speaking outside the barn. They had hidden behind stacked hay bales while listening. "If she dies," one man had said, "the ranch becomes easier to claim." Another laughed. "She doesn't even need to die. We can convince everyone she's too sick to raise children. We'll take her town. Once she's gone, the land belongs to us." They even planned to tell people Sarah had become mentally unstable because of her illness. The ranch was worth far more than anyone realized. Rich grazing land, fresh water, and valuable timber surrounded the property. Greed had turned family into enemies. The twins had remained hidden until the relatives rode away. Ever since then, they had been terrified. Tonight, Sarah's fever became so severe she could barely stand. When she finally fell asleep, Emma whispered to Emily, "We have to find Mr. Walker." Everyone in the valley knew Ethan Walker. People said he was the strongest rancher for 50 miles. More importantly, they said he always helped those who couldn't help themselves. The girls slipped into the storm while their mother slept, praying they could reach his ranch before the weather claimed them. Ethan listened without interrupting. Every word tightened something inside his chest. No child should ever carry fear like this. He stood immediately. "Show me the way." The twins looked at him with wide, hopeful eyes. "You're coming?" "I'm coming." Within minutes, Ethan saddled his powerful black stallion while wrapping the girls in thick buffalo blankets. He lifted each child carefully into the wagon, making sure they were warm before climbing into the driver's seat. The horses pushed through the blizzard as snow lashed their faces. Visibility dropped to only a few yards, but Ethan knew these lands better than anyone. After nearly 30 exhausting minutes, the outline of Sarah's small ranch appeared through the swirling snow. The place looked painfully neglected. Broken fencing leaned under the weight of ice. The barn roof sagged. No light burned inside the farmhouse. Ethan hurried to the door. It was unlocked. The cabin was colder than it should have been. "Mom," the twins cried. There was no answer. Then Ethan spotted her. Sarah lay unconscious beside the fireplace, her face pale with fever. One hand still rested near a bucket of water she had apparently tried to carry before collapsing. Her breathing was shallow, and her forehead burned with frightening heat. Without wasting a second, Ethan gently lifted her into his arms. Though weak from illness, she had clearly been beautiful before hardship had worn her down. Loose chestnut hair framed her exhausted face, and even now she clutched the edge of her faded shawl as though still trying to protect her daughters. Ethan looked toward the twins. "We're taking your mom home." Snow swirled around them as he carried Sarah through the storm toward the wagon. Back at his ranch, he laid her carefully on the bed closest to the roaring fire and covered her with warm quilts. Emma climbed onto a nearby chair, tears filling her eyes. She looked up at Ethan with heartbreaking innocence. "Is Mom going to die?" For the first time in many years, the strong cowboy had no answer. Morning arrived quietly over the snow-covered frontier. Golden sunlight filtered through the frosted cabin windows, casting warm light across the wooden floor. The fire still crackled gently in the stone fireplace, filling the room with comforting warmth. Outside, the storm had finally passed, leaving the ranch buried beneath a blanket of sparkling white snow. Sarah slowly opened her eyes. For a few moments, she couldn't remember where she was. The ceiling above her wasn't hers. Neither was the bed. A wave of panic rushed through her weakened body. She tried to sit up, but dizziness forced her back against the pillow. Just then, the cabin door opened. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped inside, carrying a steaming bowl of broth. His dark, curly hair caught the morning light, and his blue-green eyes reflected quiet concern rather than curiosity. "You should stay still," he said gently. "Your fever finally broke during the night." Sarah looked around nervously. "My girls, they're safe." The answer came before she could even finish asking. "They're eating breakfast." Almost immediately, the twins burst through the doorway. "Mom!" Emma and Emily climbed carefully onto the bed, wrapping their little arms around their mother. Sarah held them tightly, tears filling her eyes. You shouldn't have gone out in that storm, she whispered. Emily lowered her head. We were scared. Emma squeezed her mother's hand. They wanted to take you away. Sarah closed her eyes. So they had heard everything. She had hoped to protect them from the truth. Instead, they had carried that fear alone. When the girls finally wandered outside to help feed the chickens, Sarah turned toward the stranger. You saved us. He simply nodded. My name's Ethan Walker. She managed a weak smile. Sarah Collins. Silence settled between them. Finally, Sarah pushed aside the blanket. I need to go home. Ethan folded his arms. No. She looked at him in surprise. My animals need feeding. I already fed them. My fences. I repaired the broken ones this morning. My cows. They've been watered. Sarah blinked. You did all that. It needed doing. She wasn't used to someone helping without expecting payment. Life had taught her that kindness always carried a price. You don't owe us anything, she said quietly. I know. Then why? Ethan looked toward the window where the twins were laughing while building a tiny snowman beside the barn. Because no family should face winter alone. Those simple words reached somewhere deep inside Sarah's heart. For years, she had carried every burden herself. No one had ever simply chosen to help. Over the next several days, Ethan quietly became part of their routine. Every morning before sunrise, he rode to Sarah's little ranch. He repaired loose fence rails. He chopped stacks of firewood. He mended the leaking barn roof. He carried heavy grain sacks she could no longer lift. When one of the calves became trapped in deep snow, Ethan rescued it before it froze. He never complained. He never mentioned the long hours. And he never accepted a single dollar. Sarah watched all of it from the porch, wrapped in a warm blanket while recovering. The doctor from the neighboring settlement eventually visited. After examining her carefully, he sighed. You've ignored this illness for months. I didn't have a choice. You did. She looked toward her daughters. No. The doctor smiled sadly. You need rest, proper meals, and less work. Sarah almost laughed. That's impossible. From behind them, Ethan spoke calmly. It isn't anymore. The doctor glanced between them before quietly leaving. As Sarah slowly regained her strength, she began learning more about the quiet cowboy. The townspeople had always described Ethan as distant, cold, silent, but they had been wrong. He simply spoke when words mattered. One evening, Emma discovered an old harmonica inside one of Ethan's drawers. Can you play? He smiled. A little. Within moments, cheerful music filled the cabin. The twins danced across the floor, laughing louder than Sarah had heard in years. Emily spun until she became dizzy. Emma clapped her tiny hands. Even Sarah found herself laughing. Real laughter, not the polite smile she wore to hide exhaustion. Ethan noticed. You should do that more often. What? Laugh. She lowered her eyes. I'd forgotten how. The weeks passed. Snow slowly began melting from the fields. The twins started following Ethan everywhere. They helped gather eggs. They brushed the horses. They insisted on riding beside him whenever he checked the cattle. One afternoon, Emily looked up at him. Mr. Walker? Yes. Can you teach me to ride like you? I'd be honored. Emma tugged his sleeve. And me too. He chuckled. I suppose I'll need 2 horses then. Sarah watched from the porch. A strange warmth settled inside her chest. The girls smiled differently around Ethan. Safer. Happier. They laughed without fear. For the first time since their father's death, childhood had returned to their faces. One cold evening, Sarah and Ethan sat beside the fireplace while the twins slept upstairs. The cabin was peaceful. Only the crackling fire broke the silence. Sarah stared into the flames. My husband was a good man. Ethan listened quietly. We weren't wealthy. She smiled softly. But we were happy. She described the tiny wedding beneath a cottonwood tree. The little farmhouse they built together. The dreams they shared. Then everything changed. One autumn afternoon, her husband was thrown from a frightened horse while moving cattle through rocky hills. He never came home. The debt from the ranch remained. The mortgage remained. The responsibility remained. Only he was gone. Sarah's voice trembled. I thought I could carry everything. You almost did. She shook her head. I was failing. No. He looked directly into her eyes. You were surviving. Tears slipped silently down Sarah's cheeks. No one had ever understood that difference. Days later, trouble finally arrived. 3 expensive carriages rolled onto the ranch. Well-dressed men stepped into the yard alongside a sharply dressed woman wearing a fur coat. Behind them climbed a town doctor Sarah had never trusted. Emma immediately grabbed Ethan's hand. "It's them." Sarah's face turned pale. Her wealthy relatives had come. Leading them was Harold Bennett, her late husband's older cousin. He smiled without warmth. "Sarah." She remained silent. He looked toward Ethan. "And who might you be?" "Ethan Walker." Harold glanced around the property. "We've come for family business." "No," Sarah answered firmly. "You've come for my land." Harold pretended to sigh. "My dear, everyone knows you're very ill." The dishonest doctor stepped forward carrying a leather case. "I've reviewed her condition." "You've never treated me," Sarah interrupted. He ignored her. "In my professional opinion, Mrs. Collins is mentally and physically incapable of raising 2 young children." Emma gasped. Emily burst into tears. Harold unfolded legal papers. "Therefore, custody of the girls and temporary control of this ranch should pass to responsible family members." Sarah stood despite her weakness. "You'll never take my daughters." Harold's smile vanished. "You aren't well enough to decide." 2 hired men stepped forward. Before either could move another step, a large shadow blocked their path. Ethan calmly positioned himself between Sarah and the relatives. His broad shoulders seemed even larger beneath his heavy ranch coat. His expression never changed. "You'll leave?" Harold laughed. "Move aside." "No, this doesn't concern you." "It does now." The dishonest doctor frowned. "Sir, this is a legal matter." Ethan's voice remained calm. "So is trespassing." The hired men hesitated. Everyone in the valley knew Ethan Walker. More importantly, everyone knew exactly how strong he was. Harold folded the papers slowly. "You have no right to interfere." Ethan didn't move. The twins stood behind him holding Sarah's hands. For the first time in weeks, they weren't trembling. They felt protected. Harold smirked. "And who exactly are you to stand between this family and its business?" The yard fell completely silent. Snow drifted gently through the afternoon air. Ethan looked at Sarah, then back at the greedy relatives. His voice was steady enough for everyone to hear. "The man who's going to stand beside her, no matter what comes." Sarah stared at him in complete surprise. For the first time since losing her husband, someone had chosen not only to protect her, but to stay. The cold morning air hung over the valley as tension settled across Ethan Walker's ranch. Word of yesterday's confrontation had spread faster than wildfire. By sunrise, ranchers, shopkeepers, church members, and neighbors quietly gathered near the property. Everyone knew Sarah Collins' wealthy relatives would return. Everyone also knew Ethan Walker never made empty promises. He had said he would stand beside Sarah, no matter what came. And today, he intended to prove it. Just after noon, 3 polished carriages rolled into the ranch yard, followed by several hired riders. Harold Bennett climbed down first, carrying a leather folder filled with legal papers. Behind him walked the same dishonest doctor, wearing an expression of false confidence. Harold smiled smugly. "I gave you time to reconsider." Sarah stood on the cabin porch beside Ethan, wrapped in a warm wool shawl. Though still recovering, she looked stronger than she had weeks before. "I already gave you my answer," she replied. "You have no claim to my daughters or my home." Harold unfolded the papers dramatically. "According to these documents, your illness makes you incapable of caring for your children." Before Sarah could respond, another voice echoed across the yard. "That's a lie." Everyone turned. An elderly physician rode into the ranch accompanied by the town pastor and several respected citizens. It was Dr. Samuel Brooks, the doctor who had served the valley for more than 30 years. Every family trusted him. He dismounted calmly and walked towards Sarah. "I've examined Mrs. Collins myself." He looked directly at Harold. "She is seriously ill." Harold smiled triumphantly. "Exactly." The old doctor raised a finger. "But you conveniently left out the rest." The crowd grew silent. "Mrs. Collins suffers from a severe lung infection brought on by exhaustion, malnutrition, and months of overwork. It is dangerous, but it is treatable. He turned toward the gathered townspeople. She is perfectly capable of raising her daughters with proper rest and medical care. The dishonest doctor lowered his eyes. Dr. Brooks wasn't finished. I've also reviewed the report written by this gentleman. He held up several papers. It contained statements that were never supported by any examination. Harold's smile slowly disappeared. The old physician's voice became firmer. In plain English, he lied. A murmur swept through the crowd. The dishonest doctor tried to protest. I merely offered. You offered false testimony for money. The accusation struck like thunder. Harold's hired men exchanged uneasy glances. One by one, several townspeople stepped forward. Old Mrs. Henderson spoke first. I watched Sarah work harder than any person in this valley. Blacksmith Tom nodded. When my shop burned last year, she brought food for my family for 2 weeks. The schoolteacher added quietly, those little girls are polite, educated, and deeply loved. Another rancher stepped forward. We all know why Harold wants that land. More voices followed. He tried buying it years ago. When Sarah refused, he became angry. He spread rumors about her. He even offered money to people willing to testify against her. Every secret Harold had hidden for years was suddenly exposed. His confident smile vanished completely. The sheriff, who had quietly arrived with the crowd, finally stepped forward. I've heard enough. He accepted Dr. Brooks' written statement before turning toward Harold. If I discover you bribed witnesses or attempted to seize property through fraud, you'll answer for it before the law. Harold realized the battle was lost. Without another word, he climbed back into his carriage. His relatives followed silently. Within moments, the carriages disappeared down the snowy road, never looking back. Sarah watched them leave. Only then did she allow herself to breathe. Years of fear seemed to leave her shoulders all at once. Tears quietly rolled down her cheeks. Ethan gently rested a hand on her shoulder. It's over. For the first time in years. She believed it. The weeks that followed were filled with healing. Dr. Brooks visited often, making certain Sarah rested instead of exhausting herself. Ethan practically took over the ranch. He repaired every broken fence. He replaced the leaking barn roof. He planted new pasture grass before spring. He worked before sunrise and often long after sunset. Whenever Sarah thanked him, he smiled the same quiet smile. You do the same for me. Slowly, Sarah regained her strength. The color returned to her face. The terrible cough became less frequent. She could once again walk through the fields with her daughters without stopping every few minutes to catch her breath. Emma and Emily noticed every improvement. One afternoon, Emma whispered, Mom smiled 3 times today. Emily grinned. I counted 4. Sarah laughed from the porch. I can hear both of you. The girls giggled and ran across the yard. Ethan watched them chase butterflies through the melting snow. The ranch no longer sounded lonely. Children's laughter echoed between the barns every afternoon. It was a sound Ethan never realized he had missed. Spring arrived at last. The endless white landscape transformed into rolling green pastures sprinkled with wildflowers. The horses galloped freely across fresh grass. Calves filled the fields. Fruit trees blossomed beside the cabin. Together, Ethan and Sarah rebuilt her small ranch into one of the finest properties in the valley. Neighbors who once barely knew one another now gathered for community dinners, barn dances, and Sunday picnics. Sarah became healthier with each passing week. Hope returned where fear had once lived. One evening, as the sun dipped behind distant mountains, Sarah found Ethan repairing a wooden gate. You've done enough work for one day. He smiled. I've got one board left. She leaned against the fence. I've been thinking. Dangerous thing to do. She laughed. You've become funnier. I blame the twins. As if on cue, Emma and Emily came racing across the pasture carrying flower crowns. They placed one on Sarah's head. The other landed crookedly on Ethan's curls. The girls burst into laughter. Ethan pretended to look offended. I thought cowboys were supposed to look intimidating. Emily giggled. You look nice. Sarah couldn't stop laughing. Neither could Ethan. The simple moment felt more precious than either of them could explain. Months passed. Harvest season approached. The ranch flourished beyond anything Sarah had imagined. One quiet evening, Ethan saddled 2 horses. "Come with me." She looked puzzled. "Where?" "You'll see." They rode toward a hill overlooking both ranches. The setting sun painted the valley in shades of gold and crimson. Below them stretched healthy fields, grazing cattle, and 2 homes connected not by fences, but by shared hope. The twins chased each other below, their laughter drifting upward with the evening breeze. Ethan removed his hat. For a long moment, he simply looked at the valley. "When I was younger," he began quietly, "I believed this ranch was all I'd ever have." Sarah listened silently. "I convinced myself that being alone was easier." He looked toward her. Then one winter night, "You answer a knock." He nodded. "I thought I was rescuing 2 frightened little girls." His smile softened. "I didn't realize they were rescuing me, too." Sarah felt tears forming before he even continued. "I don't love you because I feel sorry for you. I know. I love your strength." He took another breath. "I love your courage." Her eyes shimmered. "I love the way you never stopped fighting for your daughters." He reached gently for her hand. "And somewhere along the way, they became my daughters in my heart, too." He lowered himself onto one knee. The valley became perfectly still. "Sarah Collins, I don't want to protect you because you need protecting. I want to spend every season beside you because I can't imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" Sarah covered her mouth as tears streamed down her cheek. For years, she had prayed for nothing more than enough strength to raise her girls. She had never dared pray for love again. Yet here it was, standing before her, patient, steady, faithful. She nodded through happy tears. "Yes, with all my heart. Yes." Ethan slipped a simple silver ring onto her finger. It wasn't expensive, but it represented something wealth could never buy. Loyalty, trust, a future. Several weeks later, friends and neighbors gathered beneath the old cottonwood tree near the ranch. It was the same place where Sarah had once married her first husband. She had worried that returning there would only bring sadness. Instead, it brought peace. The pastor smiled warmly as Ethan and Sarah exchanged vows. The entire valley celebrated. Even the toughest cowboys wiped away quiet tears. After the ceremony, Emma tugged gently on Ethan's sleeve. He looked down. "Yes, sweetheart." She hesitated, then glanced at Emily. Her sister nodded encouragingly. Emma took a deep breath. "Can?" She smiled nervously. "Can we call you Dad now?" For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. His eyes filled with tears. He knelt before both girls. "I'd be honored." The twins threw themselves into his arms. "We love you, Dad." Ethan hugged them tightly. "I love you too." Sarah watched the scene with tears of happiness. The lonely cowboy who had believed his life would always end in silence now stood surrounded by the family he had never dared dream of having. Not because he had searched for them, but because on one desperate winter night he had opened his door. As evening settled over the valley, the family stood together on the porch of their home. The same porch where fear had once lived. Now it echoed with laughter. The fire inside the cabin burned brightly. The horses rested peacefully in the barn. Snow had long since disappeared, replaced by fields full of life. Ethan looked at Sarah, then at Emma and Emily playing in the yard. He finally understood something that years of loneliness had never taught him. Home was never just a place. It was the people who chose to stay when life became difficult. And the greatest proof of love was not found in easy days, but in unwavering loyalty during the hardest ones. For storms always pass, but the hearts that remain faithful through them build a family that no winter can ever break.